So you can answer a wrong question in a very good way. And I think that's really common within designers, right? But the ability to really nail the question, what is it that we're trying to do here? And then solving it is not a problem because you have the skills and you have the ways you can arrive to a good place. But really knowing what is the actual situation here, that requires a lot of skill. That's not easy.
Designing the future is essential for shaping the world we want to live in. That's why it's more crucial than ever to be strategic about it, think long-term, and embrace complexity rather than avoid it. The field of strategic design is growing, and as two strategic designers, we want to explore how it's changing the way we design products, buildings, organizations, and landscapes. In this podcast, we'll interview strategic designers and professionals in the field, hoping to enlighten both ourselves and others about the future of designing with a strategic mindset and skill set. We're Emily and Isaac, both strategic designers with different backgrounds. Isaac is an industrial designer from Finland, and Emily has a business background in design culture and economics from Denmark. Join us for today's conversation with our guest, where we'll be unfolding strategic design. Welcome to today's episode. Today we're meeting Nicolas Fransisco Arroyo, partner and head of strategic foresight at the strategic design consultancy Manyone. Nicolas has a background in architecture, design and urban studies from the Catholic University of Chile. He also holds a bachelor's degree in enterprising leadership from the Chaos Pilot School. Previously, Nicolas was a founding partner and director of foresight at Bespoke Copenhagen and has more than 16 years of experience in the creative industry. Moreover, he's a guest lecturer at the University of Copenhagen in Innovation and Future and at the University of Gothenburg's Business and Design Master Program. To start, Nicolas, could you introduce yourself to our listeners? Who are you and what do you do for a living?
My name is Nicolas. I'm heading our strategic foresight practice here at Manyone. I'm originally from Chile. I've been here in Denmark for the past 15 years, where I came to study first for 3 years. And then I started together with a friend and a partner. We started a small studio called Bespoke, where we focus on strategic foresight and thinking, strategic design kind of services, more than 10 years ago. And for the past 3 years, I've been here in Manyone.
How did it start back when you started your design studio, Bespoke?
So I came, when I first came to Denmark, I was supposed to do a master's in architecture in Aarhus. And I bumped into this school called the Chaos Pilots, which is a hybrid between a design school and a business school. Something that is, you could say, quite common today in the world of business and design. But back then was not really a thing. So it was quite advanced for the times. And I just fell in love with the place. I went there. I met some people, fell in love with the place and said, I need to be here. I love the projects that they were doing and the kind of creative approach to solve some of the complex challenges that we're facing as societies. So it kind of changed my plans. I got in, and that was a 3 years education that I did in Aarhus. And part of our 3rd year project back then was to do something that was meaningful to you, that you wanted to really continue doing afterwards, something very hands-on as well. Together with my good friend and partner Rune told them, we just had a bunch of different projects, clients, and possible directions that we wanted to take. I came from the world of architecture and art, and Rune came from the world of graphic design. So we both came from these creative worlds, creative industries, and we were very curious to explore the creative process itself and how can we enable people that were not maybe naturally creative to be creative and to work with new ways of thinking, of doing, and approaches basically. But we didn't really know what it was, so we set on a journey of like a whole year trying to understand how could we develop processes and methodologies to bring design closer to people that are not designers. And in that process, we stumbled into strategic foresight studies and all field that back then was also quite small. It's not what it is today. And we just did a lot of different projects. We got a few clients, and then we had the need of invoicing some of our clients. So we made a little company that was called Bespoke, where we started working with a lot of these things. So when we graduated, we already had a company, we already had some projects. So we just continue And basically, that's what I've been doing since I graduated. So we ran on our own for about 10 years. We grew up to around 15 people at some point, with a lot of projects here in Europe, but also in Japan, in South America, North America, and different parts of the world. At some point, we had the need of being some sort of partner or scaling that up a little bit. We could see that the field of foresight and future studies was growing, was becoming more easy to talk about it with clients, with other partners. So then we had this opportunity to join Manyone, almost 3 years ago, where we've been kind of doing the same that we've been doing for the past 10 years, but in a bigger setup, with collaborating closely with other teams, with other skills, with other ways of working. But basically, I'm still working on my final project, you could see.
Is it sort of a department or a team that you have, or how is the practice here?
Well, now it has mutated a little bit. When we first came, first year, we pretty much stayed the same team, working on the projects that we were already working on. And then for the past 2 years, we've been integrating more with other teams that have the same mindset, similar skills as well. We have a lot of super incredible people here, Manyone, that work with technology, with research, with AI, with all kinds of things. So we kind of share the same mindset in that sense. So it made sense that we integrated more with some of the other teams that are here, right? So, but the core foresight practice is the same, and we have still a very core, you could say, foresight team that worked specifically with foresight. But the difference now is that we try to integrate it to other disciplines. So maybe before we joined Manyone, we did mainly foresight projects that somebody else had to move forward, right? So we delivered that to our clients or to our partners. Usually the outcome of that will be a strategy or some insights or some sort of strategic direction of some sort. But there was always somebody else that needed to bring that into making something more tangible, either bring the strategy to life, execute certain things or whatnot. And here we have those teams that do that. So we have the team that can bring the strategy to life, that can build the website, that can build the products, that can make the strategy actually become a reality. And that's also why we came here, because we could see that it is easy to stay, especially when it comes to strategic foresight and strategic design in general as well. It is easy to stay in the abstract sometimes and not bring it down to something that is tangible or executable. And in the DNA of Manyone, there is also execution. So we have, as a saying here, strategy led by execution. So there's no strategy without execution. I think that's extremely important, right? So for us, it's really a privilege to be in this environment where we can be in projects that are not just foresight per se, but it's part of a bigger chain of value that we try to deliver to our clients.
The coalition is very strong.
Yes. It's also very complex and really hard to work sometimes when you have different ways of working and different aspirations and different schools as well. We have all kinds of designers here. Now we have AI designers, but we also have product designers and graphic designers, brand designers, you name it. And you could say that we share a lot of things, but also there's a lot of differences as well that in projects sometimes come to life. But that's the beauty of it, to navigate that part.
Could you briefly just explain what strategic foresight is and why a company would like to have it and what kind of value that gives? Why is it relevant for them?
I would say the easy explanation is strategic foresight is the ability to understand the change that is happening around us, around an industry, around a field, try to make sense of that sense and identify the potential opportunities, potential risks that change might bring in the future. So it's a methodology to help us navigate complexity, help us navigate the change that is happening around us in a systematic way, in a methodological way. But it's not only about staying insights around the knowledge, it's also about bringing that knowledge into potentially new directions. So imagining what could potentially happen, what could be some scenarios that impact us or scenarios that we could create to develop better products, services, or experiences. It's not about predicting the future per se, but understanding change and understanding what's changing around us so that we can make certain assessments about how the future could potentially look like.
But do you use a specific type of tool to gather all the data, or does it vary also depending on the client or the project?
Yes, I mean, there are a lot of tools, especially now, I would say in the last 5 years, which this field has really expanded a lot. There's a lot of, you would say, tools and methodologies. Coming from the world of design, they are very similar to some design tools, I would say, and any designer can easily jump into these processes. Is something very natural. But of course, over the years, we have developed our own methodology and our own way of doing things. That's kind of pretty structured in how do we approach a project. But we looked at it more of as a skeleton, kind of like a blueprint. So these are usually the phases that we need to go through, but every project is different. Every client is different. Every context is different. So that requires that every project has to be bespoke.
You need also to be the anchor to actually get to know, to be sort of settled in the foresight and be sure that what is right to follow and what's not, right? You really have to sort out, I assume. You need to sort of be very strategic with your clients.
Well, we always say that we should be facilitators of these processes. Majority of times they have the answers themselves. We work with some of the largest companies in the world, and they have incredibly talented people, super sharp. So they know they have that knowledge within them, but they might lack the language or way of talking about it. So our role sometimes is to be facilitators for that space to happen, for those spaces to emerge, so that they can find their own answers, if you call it like that. So our role in many cases, it is that to facilitate, to curate information and knowledge rather than just giving them more, right? I think that's also a change that we've seen over the years, where 10 years ago, we sold, you could say, a lot of reports. That was, companies will come to us and can you give us a report on what are the trends or signals emerging in this industry, in this field. And today, all of that knowledge is out there. It's just so easy to get. There's tons of reports. There's ChatGPT where you can ask any kind of questions that you want. So it's not about knowledge. It's not about access to knowledge in the same way as it was 10 years ago. It's about sense making and understanding what you do with that knowledge and using that knowledge to have meaningful conversations as well. So sometimes in our projects, on our processes, we really push for face-to-face interactions. And in many cases, it's the first time that, they meet each other, so especially global companies where one is sitting in London, one is sitting in Amsterdam, one is sitting in Beijing. And all of a sudden, it's the first time they can actually meet in the same room and discuss some of these ideas and thoughts and collectively really start imagining, hey, how do we see our future? How do we see the world around us and how that can affect our business or what we do? And, maybe it's the first time they actually have that space to be in that space, not to be redundant, but and that's extremely important these days, kind of to create those spaces where people can sit and think and have dialogue. I like one of the definitions of dialogue is getting lost together. And I think any creative process or strategy process, you need to get lost together. It's not an A to B kind of linear situation. You need to get lost. If you're not getting lost, you're not trying hard, I think. Or you're not doing it collectively. So we try to enable those spaces where really people can get lost together and then emerge in a place together. That makes sense, right?
I think that very much captures the essence of strategic design as facilitating processes where you can get lost together. I think that's actually a great way to phrase it, because I feel like we've heard from many of the guests that facilitation is key, very much, right? But then also to say enable the creativity and actually to enable that we might go into a completely different direction, then you have to get lost. You have to not know where you are together in that space.
And when things are changing so quickly, how do you make sure that you stay up to date with the relevant information and things that could be useful for your clients? How do you kind of filter all the new information that is coming to your table?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. Yeah, I mean, like I said before, there was a lot of focus on reports and these more static kind of knowledge pieces. So you would do a 1-year study on how the beauty industry might look like, and then you will run on that work for a year or 2 or 3 sometimes. So, you do the studies, you get these insights, and then you base your strategy based on that. And today there's less and less of that. Of course, you still need to do, there's still things that don't change that fast, so it's still relevant to do that kind of work. But then there's a layer of change that is really fast. It comes every few months, every few weeks sometimes. And we've been an attempt to kind of deal with that is this idea of having a radar that allows you to monitor what's emerging. And we actually have developed some digital tools we'll call the Manyone radar, actually, which is a digital tool that is constantly being updated with the latest signals or trends or tendencies that are emerging in different fields, and allows us to have this more fresh perspective on what's changing around us. And we also understand that things that appear in the radar, some might stay and some might disappear. So it's also not to take it too serious, you could say. It's kind of more about tracking, okay, there's something that came up here, still going to be there in 6 months. Maybe we should start paying attention to it. If it doesn't, maybe we let it go. And that way of thinking, we're trying to also bring into projects as well. And is actually one of the things that we offer our clients is to develop a radar for them, both the way of thinking and the way of looking at it, the mindset, but then actually also the tool. So we have a digital tool that's also using AI to fit things that are emerging, and it becomes kind of like a living tool that you can check every week, and have a sense of what's happening now in our field, in our domain of interest.
In this radar that you develop both as a tool for Manyone, but also for the clients, do you incorporate, let's say, sustainable targets or the planetary boundaries, or somehow do you incorporate these emerging threats or changes into it as well? And how is it sort of played out in practice?
It's always different. Also depends on the industry. You can have a very specific radar for the pharmaceutical industry, and within that, maybe there's only looking into other medical advancements, or you can make it very broad and look into how culture is changing and how, I don't know, how our conceptions of beauty are changing and how that might affect a company like Novo Nordisk, for instance. So that could be, there's different scopes depending also on what industry you are operating in, and of course, what they want to use that for. Right? So sometimes it's only about awareness, having the awareness of what's happening around them, but sometimes it's for specific projects or initiatives that maybe require different frameworks, like planetary boundaries or other lenses that we can look at change. So I would say it's always different. It will depend on the context and what's required.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, it seems to me that Manyone are working with such a broad set of different clients and industries. How do you kind of navigate through that? Or is it that you usually work with one client for a longer time period and then you jump to the next one? Or do you try to balance different companies and different industries at the same time? Are there some challenges that you have faced?
Yes, that's the big question here, because we do have a lot of different teams with different skills, different focuses, and also we work across industries, right? So I think that's part of the magic of the place, is that it is so different, and that you can jump from working with a pharmaceutical company one day and then go to work with a car company, and then the next day with a furniture company. So I think that's also what people like about working here, is that you have that ability to jump from very different projects. Of course, in my role, I am not deep in projects. So I am jumping in between a lot of things. So that's sometimes a little bit overwhelming and confusing, but that's also the value that I can bring, is to make these connections. So something that you see in the finance industry can actually be applied in the furniture industry. And that's a little bit of my role, is to kind of create these bridges, make these connections, and try to cross-pollinate a little bit across our projects. But of course, there's also team members that are only in one project for 6 months. Or with one client for 6 months, depending on what you do. If there's a UX designer or somebody building technology, sometimes they are in one client, one project for a longer period of time, because that requires that, right? So it depends a little bit on what is your role, but at least in my case, I am jumping in between things all the time, and that's also what I enjoy and what I like, because I'm always learning about different industries. I'm always on my toes because it requires me to learn new things, read more about new things, and also handle different styles. We have clients with very different styles, some much more conservative, some much more playful when it comes to how we can create value for them. And I think that's fun. That's fun too. I really like the diversity on that.
You really become a great process consultant.
Yeah, absolutely.
For this process.
You really test your social skills as well, and how you can interact with very different kinds of people, from super different to work with a very German client versus a very Swedish client. Total different cultures, total different approaches to company culture, innovation, strategy, and I think that's really inspiring. It's really exciting to be in those spaces where also culture is different.
Which project at Manyone or Bespoke has stood out for you? Has there been anything where you thought like this was something I was like maybe overly proud of, or something that I always rephrase or like refer to when I talk to people when I stand out for you from the past 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many. The other day I was talking to one of our colleagues about it. I always had a dream of working for the UN, for instance, back in the days, and then we did it, and then we did some amazing things there that made me really proud. In specific, I think every project is special. Some are super. They give you a lot in terms of the content. So a couple of years ago, we were working with a big energy company that partnered up with a big insurance company because they wanted to explore, the future of home as a service together as a joint venture. And the content in that was really exciting because it was also looking at a topic like home as a service from two different angles. How could it look like for insurance? How could it look like for an energy company? So I learned a lot when it comes to those fields as well. But there are other cases. We have big client in Germany, for instance, a big supermarket chain where the people is amazing. And the people that we work with is amazing. And I mean, the work is also super interesting and super fun all the time. But especially the relationship and the way of collaborating with our client is so fluid, and it's very open, transparent, fun, and meaningful as well. We create value for them, and they challenge us, and we challenge them. And I think it's a very healthy, you could say, client and agency relationship, and I really enjoy that as well. So I think it really depends. Like some kind of work is interesting for the topic, kind of what you're exploring, and some are more interesting for the frames and where you are. Some are more challenging when it comes to stakeholder management and who you need to get involved. And there's a whole dance in that. So there's almost no focus on the content of the project itself. It's more about the politics behind it, which is also interesting. Some people hate that. I really enjoy that diversity as well on how also makes it fun for you to be in those projects, because I also get a little bit bored if I feel that I'm playing the same song again, because especially at this time in my career as well, where you've done this for many years, it's pretty easy to, go to a place and say, we do this, and this and that, and then kind of just run with it. You know that it works, what creates value and what doesn't, but it also becomes a little bit boring, and I don't feel I'm challenging myself enough or pushing the boundaries of what could be done, right?
Yeah, you always challenge. It's funny because we had, just want to add that we had a course at the academy that's called Strategic Design and Consulting. So it was very much about, there were some client briefs from the industry, and then there was a collaboration with these clients throughout 4 or 5 months. The focus was both to engage with a challenge, a design challenge, and to work on that, like you say, the project, the content of everything. But it was also to learn to consult and do the process consultation. And so, like you stated here, it's both the process of learning to sort of establish a helping relationship with the client. And sometimes that ends up in a completely different place than they initially thought of, because their initial problem or brief outcome of what they actually do need, right? So that's something you learn along the way. Do you think that the two tracks here, the two parallel tracks of both having the process as a project in itself, you could say, and that can be very intriguing and interesting, but also having the project sometimes be the thing that actually guides everything. Do you think that that's unique for a strategic designer in terms of their area of expertise?
I think a lot of your role is to be a little bit of a psychologist sometimes for your clients. And when you start digging deep, there's always something else.
Yeah, exactly.
And you need to really understand because let's say you're working for Microsoft, I think a mistake that many people do sometimes to think that, okay, your client is Microsoft, but before that, your client is the person that is hiring you. So you need to understand what is the agenda that person has in the organization. What is their role? What do they want to, get away with? What do they want to create? How can you help them? So I think it's a lot of changing a little bit of this mindset on really trying to be helpful to the person that you're closely working with. Because if you help them look good, they will keep on working with you because they have an agenda, they have ambitions as well that they want to maybe move in the ladder in the organization. So how can you help them do that and bring the best version of themselves into their work? And I really believe in that. It's about the people that you work with in it more than the company itself. Of course, it's important, that it should serve the company at large, of course. But we shouldn't forget that, at the end of the day, it's about people. And there's people with an agenda or an intention on why they're bringing you in. And if you don't understand that, sometimes it becomes really hard to create value. And sometimes you also discover that they all just want to bring you to, I don't know, they don't really need you too much. Maybe it's more of a show-off thing, And sometimes that's okay, but at least you know why you're there. So I think it's really important as a consultant to understand the reason why they hire you. If it's really for a project, or sometimes it's because they have something they need to get through.
Exactly.
And that's a different thing, because maybe then the project might be secondary. Maybe you need to do a different project or a different initiative. And we experience that a lot, that sometimes you realize that the project that they thought they wanted to do with us is actually not that, is something else, or require more projects within the project or more initiatives or whatnot. So
it's interesting that what you do is with the client that you have and figuring out what is actually the need here.
Yeah.
Because typically the clients know that they want a solution and they might have ideas of what, but they have not analyzed themselves internally in terms of why are we actually seeking this solution.
Yes, I really like that sentence of a quote, like, we'll be really sad to answer the wrong question. And I think, like, especially designers, can be really good at doing things.
Yeah.
So you can answer a wrong question in a very good way. And I think that's really common within designers, right? But the ability to really nail the question, what is it that we're trying to do here? And then solving it is not a problem, because you have the skills and you have the ways you can arrive to a good place. But really knowing what is the actual situation here, that requires a lot of skill. That's not easy. Also because you might have some frameworks and some templates you can download from the internet or whatever, but there's also some experience that is needed and certain sensitivity as well. You need to be a really good listener as well to what's being said and not said from the client side.
Yeah, I was just about to ask, like, how do you actually get to those critical questions? Like, in what stage can you actually start asking those questions? Do you have to first establish like a good relationship before you actually get there? Or do clients, in your experience, tend to like those questions earlier in the process to not, let's say, save more time or resources? When do you actually start asking those really tough questions?
I think it requires a lot of trust as well. And building trust takes time. So that's the challenge. We have some relationships, some clients that we've been working for 7-8 years now, where you can go straight into it super fast because you have the trust. You know that we're here to help each other. But especially with new clients, it's not that easy because you can also come across as very arrogant or starting bad terms if you try to be too confronting and too bold with some things just when you're getting to know each other, right? So there's a little bit of that sensitivity again, kind of that thing's really important for a consultant, to have that sensitivity and know what's required now. What does the moment call for? Does it call for tough questions, or does it call for just go with the flow, build some trust, and maybe address those things later? So I think timing is really important. I don't have an answer for that. How do you do that? I think it's just about really trying to sense kind of what is the room calling for. If sometimes we encounter people that is very direct and very open, and you can go straight into it. Sometimes you require the trust, or you need to show a little bit that you have some competence. You need to show some results before, and maybe that's okay. And then slowly build the trust over time so that you can actually start addressing the deeper things. I think it's like in any relationship, really, in life, it's kind of requires time, and you need to prove yourself a little bit in order to have the trust. to ask the tough questions and confront the darker side sometimes.
Yeah. Has it been difficult for you to explain what you do to others, also clients, in terms of how you apply it in practice? What role strategic design is playing in this? Has that been difficult?
It's super hard to explain to my mom, but
Okay.
or to older generations maybe.
And people maybe outside of the field, you could say.
Yeah, and also want to say I'm a consultant, but that's also super broad, right? What?
Yeah.
No, I think, of course, after so many years, you also have a lot of, you could say, projects and experiences under the belt, and that allows you also to start conversations from a different place because maybe you have experienced something similar at some point in your career, so you can refer to those things. So if there's a new relationship that we're starting with a client or a partner or a collaborator, and they are facing a certain challenge, and maybe you've seen something similar in the past, then you can bring that up and share how you approach that, or maybe you have heard somebody that did something. So I think that's when you use maybe your accumulated knowledge and your accumulated experience to create that trust that you're trying to understand them and understand the problem correctly. Yeah, I would say that's one of the things that worked the best for me, at least, is kind of to bring my past experiences and also bring things that I read somewhere. Always have something that you can create a parallel to the situation that they're facing, so that they feel that you understand them. I think it's a big mistake sometimes to try to look too smart in front of a client and try to think that you have all the answers and that you know everything. I think it's because in reality you don't. You have a lot of questions as well. I think the more honest you are towards that, people can see that. And most people understand that they don't even themselves understand some of the challenges they need to solve. So if we're lost together, it's much easier to come out of it together as well.
What type of competencies, skill sets do you think is important for a strategic designer to have in today's industry? What are some things that might be important today that maybe weren't as important, let's say, 10 years ago?
The first one, I think, is flexibility and adaptability, so that you are able to change plans and change intentions. Maybe you can start a project and the first day you realize this is not really what we thought it was. We need to change direction and not be afraid of doing that if that's what's required. And you can see that in, most junior people kind of very afraid of that, but we made an agreement or we have a contract and we said we would do this, but if it doesn't make sense, why should we do it? And I think that's having that boldness to be flexible, of course, communicating with the client and agreeing that's the best direction to take, of course, but having that boldness to change direction and be flexible, I think is super important. Then I think being hungry for learning is super important. Just seeing yourself always as a beta, as a beta project, that you never done really learning things, always acquiring new knowledge. I think that's really, really, really important because, we're talking about it before, the world is changing really fast and the skills that are needed are always changing really fast. So it requires us to be hungry for knowledge always. And then listening. I think really learning to listen good, not to what you want to hear, but actually what's being said or what's not being said through body language or through other kind of media. And if you're a good listener, I think you have a huge advantage in the industry, because sometimes we all, think that because of our experience or whatever, like we know it all and we know the right path. But sometimes it's in those little details that a client can mention or that is somebody mentions in a meeting or in a conversation, you can identify actually what's important for them, personally or for the company or for their teams. And the older I get, I think the more I see listening as some of the most important skills that we have, because sometimes it's not a technical issue how you solve the challenge. It's really about how to find the right challenge that needs to be solved. We're surrounded by good designs of meaningless pains or meaningless problems. Yeah, sometimes the solutions are super simple, more simple than what we think, but it's because we don't really understand the core root of things.
Do you miss sometimes the creative aspect of your work? I know that you are very creative, I assume, but in terms of delivering something more feasible, do you miss that?
Yeah, a lot. I think that's always the conversation also with some of my colleagues,
Yeah.
especially when in the level that I operate, where it's a lot about relationships, conceptualizing projects, starting things. And sometimes it is a little bit abstract. And I also come from a very tangible world, from art and from architecture. And the first part of my career as well, put a lot of work into making things. And sometimes, my day goes away just by making a lot of slides. And they can be very beautiful slides and very, very cool and very deep, but still, they feel very intangible for me. So I miss that tactility. But I try to get some of that also outside. I paint a lot. I do a lot of creative things with my hands. So I think I get that urge out through other things, and also at work, really try to quantify my work in different ways. Right? Sometimes about interactions with people. Sometimes about how many new relationships have you started this week. How many meaningful conversations did you have, or good sparring sessions with colleagues or with partners? And I think that's also the work. And seeing that as the work as well is a change in mindset. And when you come from a world where everything that you can quantify and touch, is it a printed book, or is it an object or something? When you don't have that, then how do you quantify that? So you have this sense of resolution, like, okay, I made something. It's out there in the world, which is the problem of in our knowledge society today, where a lot of knowledge is ideas, as digital is in our computers, is in the cloud. We don't really see it, so we don't feel like we have achieved anything sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that goes across. It's not just in our industry. I think it's in most industries today. I don't know how an accountant feels after.
Yeah, most accountants are artists on the side. But it's interesting because we've talked with so many guests who have had a background within architecture, design, or similar, and they have felt that they wanted to change something in the current industry in the way they practiced what they do. And then they went into strategic design and developed the skills similar to what you do as consultants. But I think a lot of them, and also just our own experience has been that we sort of all went through an identity crisis along the way, right? So you changed certainly from being a practitioner within a field to start working on a strategic level. And you might even start working less with architecture or design and start working more as a consultant. So how was that for you? Was it natural, or do you still feel like you're developing and it's defined along the way?
Yeah, I think it's a natural evolution on how I do things. But from the very beginning, especially in Bespoke, we put a lot of effort into bringing some tactility to some of this work. So we put a lot of focus on facilitation and creating these spaces where people could be together, talk together, think together, reflect together. And if you take that as a creative challenge, there's a huge opportunity there to be creative. How do you set up a room? How do you set up visuals in the room? How do you make people move around? So always trying to take those opportunities as kind of little creative challenges. And we still do that till today, so that if we do a workshop, it's not just people sitting in front of their computers, but actually do something different. So maybe it's not creative in the same way as when I was a student, for instance, but it is still creativity in terms you need to think how you want people to experience that moment. Because I'm a firm believer that people don't remember what you say, but they remember how you make them feel. So especially in this kind of face-to-face sessions, they're not going to remember much about the content, but they will remember how they felt talking to others, reflecting, getting a new insight. And if you take that as a design challenge, I think that's a lot of room to be super tactile. What kind of food do you put? What kind of drinks do you put in there? Are you making any printouts? How are you using, I don't know, Post-its or other kind of visual elements? There's a lot of little things there that could be done in a beautiful way, so that enhance that experience. So putting thought behind it, making it thoughtful, I think is a way for me at least to make it more fun. So because I don't really enjoy just making slides and being in the computer all the time. So it has to have a component of create some sort of creative component for me to be excited about it.
Definitely, yeah. And then it's more meaningful for the participants as well.
Yes,
I assume,
exactly.
Yeah, how important is on-site working for an agency like Manyone? Does it even work to work remotely? Is that even, a thing? Is it that you really need to get people together to sit in a room and also make it a bit more tangible?
Yeah, I think we actually see the need now from clients. They are very keen on meeting together. They're very keen on face-to-face meetings. Of course, after COVID, I think you remove a lot of the unnecessary travel. before COVID, I think I was in Japan once a month pretty much because we had some clients there. So I was traveling every month to Japan, for instance, and sometimes for 2-hour meetings or things like that.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
And that's
Yeah.
gone, right?
Yeah.
And even in Europe, you will go to Oslo, go to Berlin or whatever for a meeting, and all of that is gone now. But when it comes to bigger gatherings, bigger sessions, when you need to work together, actually, I think we see it from our client side that they are really prioritizing getting together. They love to come to our office. Like here, we host a lot of things. We have a nice view and we have a nice setup, and we offer that, and then they love that. So we work a lot with IKEA, for instance, and they have people all over Europe, and suddenly Copenhagen becomes pretty easy for everybody to fly in. So they fly in for a day or two, and we get a lot of work here face to face, and that becomes also part of most of our projects, I would say, to bring people together. So I would say that it's not just us pushing for it. I see clients that are pushing for it because they also have that need
Yeah.
internally to also meet their colleagues, people that they haven't met before, and things like that.
Yeah.
So this becomes also a good excuse sometimes to do that. And internally here, we have right now we have an office first policy in terms of, it's not that it's super strict like that, but we want to be together. We want, because that's where ideas happen, where culture happens as well. So of course, there's some people that work better remote, maybe because their tasks require more focus, and so that's a different thing. But I think for the majority of people here, they will want to be together and getting to know each other and creating culture. Because culture is not something you just say that, hey, this is our culture. You cannot just say it. It is built in the everyday life, right? So if you don't have people together, how are you going to build that? And so we're trying to also do that here, kind of find a healthy way of doing that, so that you still have the flexibility that remote work allows for some, but with culture at the center. So that's that we have some sort of unity, which I think for our kind of work, for creative kind of work, is super important.
Definitely. Yeah.
Because there's these two energy or two modes in creative work. One that's more about scattering, kind of like where you need to make connections or gather things and meet people, talk to people, bounce ideas, all of that. And then there's a more kind of gathering kind of mindset, which is more about focus, concentration, and deep work. And I think most of us here dance between those two things, right? So it is good to have spaces where you can go in depth and have deep work, but then also you need these spaces to be energized and bounce ideas just with people over lunch. So it doesn't not everything needs to be a Zoom meeting, for instance.
Yeah.
So yeah, but that's a design challenge, I could say, that we are trying to work with.
Do you have an advice for someone pursuing a career in your field, working with strategic foresight, for instance?
Curiosity goes together with what I mentioned before on the hungriness for knowledge, is really being curious towards what's happening around us, not being judgmental necessarily, just being curious and observe. It's very natural that we like to judge things. So we see something happening, especially these days in politics and the world, and we say, oh, this is terrible, or this is great, but sometimes just observe, hey, where's that coming from? What made this happen? How could this unfold? Kind of, think a little bit on scenarios. But that having that curiosity, if you see that Trump won the election in the US, and we all feel like, oh, what happened there? How can people do that? Blah blah blah. But maybe having the curiosity of like, well, okay, why is people attracted to that? What's behind that? Why are people voting for him? Like, what are the narratives? Because we live in these bubbles as well, where of course everything around us kind of enhances our own way of thinking, right? So it's so hard to break from these bubbles. So really trying to break from those bias bubbles. Then also starting with real problems, trying to, especially I always say to people that are studying, they're in studies, just getting real life experience, real problems, going out and talking to people, asking what are real people's challenges, because then you can learn a lot about how people live and think and operate, and not just take too much in your computer, making kind of assumptions on how things are. And then I would say getting a mentor. I think that's been super helpful for me. I always had mentors through my career, also through my studies back then. In very different kinds of mentors, some of them very specific about different areas. I had a mentor. I was an expert coach on leadership because I wanted to learn on that. But then I also had some older people that just had a lot of experience in life and business, and they were not experts. But for me, that perspective was super valuable. I had younger mentors as well, at some point, teenager, that we had a kind of conversations once in a while because I wanted to understand how younger people were thinking and feeling.
Smart choice.
And having this flexibility towards mentorship, making it something that is always in your life, I think is super important. At least one person that you should always have a mentor or somebody that you talk to. You don't need to call it a mentor, but somebody that you kind of can talk once in a while without any agenda, but that you just want to kind of bounce ideas. And especially if they're very different from you, if they come from a different culture, from a different industry, from a different age group, I think that's super important. I never regretted that.
No.
No.
Yeah, it's a very good advice as well. Like really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and always whenever people ask me to mentor, I'm always happy because I always learn something as well. If I'm mentoring younger people or older people sometimes. Yeah, I think this, and also I really believe in that you need to build your relationships before you need them. So I think that's also together with that, especially for younger students and designers, just meet people and build those relationships in a genuine way. It doesn't need to be because you want to get something out of it. Sometimes you're just curious about something and invite them for a coffee or have a little walk. And, then you do that once a year or something like that. And then you never know, in the future, in 10 years, maybe they could become a client or an employer or a partner or somebody you want to start a business with. I don't know. I just had so much of that over the years, still, last week I got an email from a potential client who is a student that I had 8 years ago, right? And because you had some sort of curiosity and an honest relationship, you have those potential lucky opportunities. You're creating luck for yourself, right? But it needs to come from a genuine place.
Yeah.
Not because you want to get something out of it, but because you're genuinely curious on people. Especially, and if you're young, if you start doing that when you're young, then when you hit your mid-30s, late 30s, you have a very big potential network of opportunities. Because you never know how that could play out in the future.
No, exactly. Yeah. Good advice. Well, I will take that with me too.
Sure.
And then looking ahead, how do you think that the field of strategic design will evolve, and will it become more popular or stay the same? What do you think?
I hope it becomes more popular because that's our whole value proposition. Is strategic design. No, but I mean, we always talk that we want to bring design. Like design is too important to be outside the boardroom. That's something we always say. Sometimes a lot of strategic decisions are made by the McKinseys or the Deloittes and the more traditional consulting firms, which there's nothing wrong with that. But I think that creativity and design can contribute so much to how we are taking decisions today and how we're making strategy. Because we need to embrace the complexity of things in the world. And I think design is a is a discipline that naturally does that and is more concerned about, like what we talked before, kind of trying to find the right problem instead of just the right solution very fast. So I think I see that there's a need from businesses and organizations to bring more of the strategic design mindset into how they operate. So I see it growing. I think we see it in our field. Of course, it is growing. There's a bigger need for what we do. The challenge will be that, can you be a strategic designer without being a designer first? That's kind of the question, right? What's first? What comes first?
Yeah.
As this field becomes more, stronger and more recognized as well. Because so far, we all here, I would say, in some sort of way, we're all strategic designers here at Manyone in some way or another. But also the majority of people here are designers or come from a background in design of some sort. Maybe they don't do graphic design anymore or they don't do industrial design anymore. But they come from that, so they understand how to do things in a certain way, right? It's very rooted in the way of working. So what we do is we try to translate that way of working into a different context. But now, maybe you can study strategic design and maybe you're bypassing some of this craft experience, So what does that do to the field, I don't have an answer. I don't think it's necessarily bad or necessarily good, but it's just definitely having an impact on it. So I think that would be the challenge, to balance those two things, because I do believe that there is a value in knowing a craft in order to be a generalist. Because I think a strategic designer in rough terms is a generalist, is somebody that can kind of this T kind of person that can have a lot of different competences across many different domains and is able to apply that knowledge into specific verticals if it's needed. But when you have a craft that you kind of learn, you have that internalized in you, so it's easy for you to apply it to other fields, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how it's going to evolve, especially now with more and more educations where you can actually learn this. I think is exciting.
Yeah, definitely. We've talked about previously because oftentimes strategic design is something that's an external entity where an agency or consults you as a client and then analyze your case or situation, right? So do you think that if this field continues to grow, that actually more and more companies will also hire internal strategic designers as a sort of supporting mechanism internally in the strategic processes? Or will it still continue to be an external relationship that you have to establish?
No, I think it's already there. I think companies are already getting, you could say, hybrid strategists or strategists that are not necessarily coming just from a business school, but have a design component to it, or even an artistic component sometimes, or a sustainability component. I think like this hybridness in strategy is more and more required, and we see it with our clients, the people that we work with. Those profiles are there. So the people that we work closely with is people that maybe work in an agency before. Now they're working for a private company or come from two different kind of industries and shape their career in a certain way. I think it's already there.
Yeah, there are many hybrids out there. I can see from looking at the landscape that it's more and more needed as well. The generalists who can do both, basically.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, looking more on your future career, is there any global or local problem that you really get excited about, something that you really want to get into and solve? Or is there any specific type of project? Tell us a little bit of what you're looking at for the coming year.
Work-wise or more personal?
It can be both.
Because I think work-wise, I'm very curious about how to elevate the role of specifically strategic foresight into more leadership, the leadership space. So especially today, like you see that not all leaders have foresight and not all foresight has a leadership component as well. So I'm very curious in that intersection of leadership and foresight. How do we use future thinking to equip leaders to think better and more holistically about the future, because they are taking decisions that will impact the future. And I don't think that all of them have have that in mind. Sometimes they're, especially in companies or organizations, they're very concerned about next quarter and how our profits and how do we grow, how do we challenge this, how do we tackle this challenge that we have in this quarter. So it's very short term. And long-term thinking becomes a secondary exercise. So I'm very curious on how to bring that closer to leaders. And more personally, I think in terms of just things that I'm interested in, I'm very curious about the post-shame era that we are living in. I think the last couple of years been a lot about living in the post-truth era, where you don't know what's true or not, what's fake, etc. But I think now, more and more, especially the last couple of months, it's been more evident that we're living in an era where shame is not what it used to be. Like people can say, do whatever they want, and it seems not to have any implications. And even that I might have an opinion about it or a strong reaction to it, I'm generally curious about it. Why is this happening? And because I think it has huge consequences to our democracies and to our lives and in our business world as well, right? So of course it's something that everybody has a stand on it, and it awakens a lot of feelings and emotions in me. But I'm trying to, just to take my own medicine, what I was sharing before, also trying to really be curious about it. How did we end up here? Because it's not a coincidence. It's always like a chain of events that led to this. So I'm curious to see how that's going to play in the coming years as well. Yeah, what happens when all the rules that we thought we had don't apply anymore? Of course, it's really scary, but it's also a huge opportunity also to redefine maybe some of these things, to create alternative ways of living and working. So it doesn't need to be necessarily a bad thing, but the first kind of reaction is that it's a bad thing, but it could be also an opportunity. And so I'm genuinely curious about that.
Yeah, will be interesting to follow. Yeah, hopefully you can facilitate some of the process at some point. That would be nice.
Yes.
And get a bit of a control. Could you share with us and our listeners books or podcast recommendations that you like listening to or reading?
I really listen a lot to the Diary of a CEO podcast. I think it's becoming quite popular now, but I think most of the interviews there are really high quality and really high quality guests. So I really enjoy that one because you kind of learn about many different domains, from politics to science to, all kinds of things. So I really enjoy that one. Also, in terms of books, all kinds of things. So I really enjoy that one. Also, in terms of books, I will, especially for young strategic designers, I would recommend to read anything from Humberto Maturana, who is one of the fathers of systems thinking. He has a couple of interesting books. One is called Autopoiesis, and the other one is called The Tree of Knowledge, I think. But he has also some of his papers and kind of knowledge in general. He's a biologist and explain, systems thinking from biology perspective, but then makes the parallel to our social systems and how do we organize as people in communities, and you can use that to understand how organizations work, right? So it's been super helpful for my work as well to understand how do we organize as living systems, because when you talk about culture and how you design culture and all these things, it's about systemic thinking systemically and looking at people as living systems. So anything from Humberto Maturana, I think, is super, super valuable. The last couple of months, I've been super stuck with Robert Greene, who's also been on that podcast I was mentioning. But he also has a bunch of super interesting books. He has one about power. But the one I've been reading a lot is around mastery, which I think, a lot of the things he's mentioning resonate a lot to how I see, especially our field here, and how do you, especially as a young person, can set yourself up for success by doing small things today that over time will compound to something really useful for you, maybe in 10, 15, 20 years in your career. So I think especially for younger people, super valuable inspiration. And how can you start now very small, developing your skills, developing your mindsets, expanding your network and connections with people, So anything from him, I think he's very super interesting thinker. Most of the things he's writing about.
Yeah, lifelong development. That's what we're losing into.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, of your skills and mindset. Listeners can follow you online if they want to check out your work and what you do.
Yeah, I guess LinkedIn. You can just look for me, Nicolas Fransisco Arroyo. Probably the best place to find me.
We will tag you in the LinkedIn post and people can go find you. Perfect. But thank you so much for joining our podcast, Nicolas.
Of course. A pleasure is mine.
Yeah, thank you, Nicolas.
It was a true pleasure. It was the manifestation of strategic design here at Manyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. We look forward to unfolding more strategic design in the future. See you next time. If you enjoyed today's episode of Unfolding Strategic Design, make sure to follow us on LinkedIn, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. Your support helps us bring in more inspiring voices from the world of strategic design.